Last week, the phrase hip drop tackle was the talk of the NFL world. What is it? Why is it being banned? How does this impact offenders? This is ruining football, and so on and so forth. And then over in the National Rugby League, the Aussies said, "Hold my beer, mate." That beer would not be a Foster's, by the way. Foster's may be Australian for beer in America, but it's not the beer consumed by Australians in Australia. What was I talking about again? Hip drop tackle. That's right. This week over in the NRL, we saw two absolutely horrific hip drop tackles that highlight both this act's brutality along with the issues the NFL is going to have in trying to adjudicate these. I'm Cheyenne Hollis, this is the Touchback, and when it comes to the hip drop tackle, well, sometimes it's best just to follow the lead of Huey Lewis in the news.
It's hip to be square. It's hip to be square.
This may be the unpopular opinion, this may make me a square, so to say, but removing the hip drop tackle from any sport, including American football, is good. It is for the best. It's not about making the game softer or making it more difficult for defenders to defend. It's about getting rid of a play that is just sheer terrible. It's an absolutely brutal act. Any sport, rugby league, American football, wherever you want to look. Hip drop tackles are bad, okay? In the NFL and the NRL, anywhere else. This is not simply another way to tackle. This isn't simply a way to stop the opposition. This is far worse than that. It's just such a violent play. Such an unnecessarily violent play. That was on full display in round 4 of the NRL, the place where, of course, the whole hip drop tackle pandemic began, the ground zero for the hip drop tackle. The league has been trying to combat this for a few years now, and the NRL has even advised the NFL on the matter. Although they are still struggling to officiate it, to punish it, really just to identify what a hip drop tackle is and isn't. We'll get to that though in a moment. First, let's see the hip drop tackle in action. First up is Dolphins forward Max Plath, who absolutely decimates Philip Sami with just this play. I mean, it's just watch it for yourself. That is a hellacious move. It looks more like something you would have seen in All Japan Pro Wrestling in the 1990s and not any sort of sporting contest. Sami was thankfully kind of okay. He stayed in the game but was noticeably limping throughout the remainder of the contest. The second hip drop tackle we saw last weekend came from West Tigers 5/8 Lachlan Gavin in his side's victory during the Parramatta Eels. This is perhaps an even worse example than what we saw from Plath. That tackle was brutal, but this is completely unnecessary given the fact that the Eels attacking player has long since offloaded the ball before being hip drop tackled. Just about everyone can see here why the NRL and NFL wants to eliminate this play from their respective sports. Even if this was an accident, it was just a player trying to make a tackle, it's terrible. It's a bad look. While we're here, please do not tell me it is too difficult for a defender to not sandbag an opponent and then fall on their legs. It's just bad technique, it's bad form, it's wildly dangerous. It's not about it's too hard for the defender. Usually it happens in cases of laziness. The issue for the National Football League here is how exactly are officials going to call, how they're going to identify and then flag hip drop tackles that aren't patently obvious. The examples seen in the NRL last week and some of the high-profile cases highlighted by the NFL are fairly cut and dry. Even then though, the National Rugby League has put several safeguards in place to ensure hip drop tackles aren't missed or don't go unpunished. To that end, every time a hip drop tackle is expected to have occurred, it is then reviewed by the NRL bunker, or essentially the video referee who assists the on-field official in making calls. That doesn't happen in the NFL. Officiating crews are going to be expected to call hip drop tackles right there in real time through all of the chaos of every single NFL play. This isn't to say every hip drop tackle that happens on an NFL field is hard to spot. There are some pretty clear and dry examples. Tony Pollard, obviously a big one that any referee can spot and flag. But there are going to be just as many instances that are called incorrectly and possibly costing teams games in the process. Who needs a sky judge, though? Heaven forbid we question the man in the middle on the field, even if it means we have to run out a miniature TV and headset for him to review the damn thing. It's gotta be his call, no? Putting that mini rant aside, there's also the punishment aspect of the hip drop tackle in the NFL that needs to be addressed here. In the NRL, a hip drop tackle results in a penalty, the player being sent off for 10 minutes, and most likely a multi-game suspension. In the NFL, they're just going to penalize hip drop tackles with a 15-yard penalty and an automatic first down. Is that really a deterrent? In some cases, probably. But in other cases, when the ball carrier is out in the open field and threatening to break off a big gain, taking the penalty is the better choice. Let us never forget the Marcus Peters horse collar tackle that saved a touchdown for the Raiders in their game against the Green Bay Packers a few seasons back. He was fined for that, and fines are likely coming for those players who do commit hip drop tackles, but is that going to be enough? I am not saying the NFL needs penalties as stringent as the NRL, which seem extremely harsh, very severe. What I am saying is that the deterrent here doesn't seem strong enough to eradicate this play from American football. Hell, players in the NRL still can't stop committing hip drop tackles despite the fact that they're going to miss 2 games at a minimum of a 24-game season. All of this points to one thing here. The NFL doesn't quite understand what it's doing. It hasn't thought this through when it comes to banning the hip drop tackle. It's a well-intentioned rule. It's a rule I do think the sport does need, but it's been implemented in such a way that will lead to unintended consequences, most of which will probably be a bit messy. The NRL has had a head start in trying to solve its hip drop tackle problem, and as seen last weekend, it struggles to find the right balance. Then if you go back and you look a little further and you see what exactly the league has dealt with, it doesn't necessarily have the best grasp on hip drop tackles as a whole.
Anyway,
That's a definition of a hip drop.
Oh, please. He
Well,
wasn't
look at
running
it.
any. He wasn't running anywhere. He didn't
Mate,
have the ball.
That's the definition of a hip drop right there.
That is not the normal hip drop.
There are still infractions that don't get called. There are other infractions that shouldn't be called but do get called as hip drop tackles. No one really seems to fully grasp just what this is and isn't. Far too much is left up to interpretation. It's just everyone thinks they know what a hip drop tackle is because the rules are so vague as to what exactly constitute a hip drop tackle. It's probably going to be worse here in the States where you still have quite a few folks who don't really know what a hip drop tackle is. And certainly the NFL has not done a great job explaining what it thinks a hip drop tackle is. Meanwhile, the rule about hip drop tackles, way too vague. It's going to leave way too much up to the imagination. It's just what referees, what officials interpret, what pundits interpret. This is just going to be a huge nightmare, a quagmire for all parties involved. Worse yet, we're putting more on the plate of NFL officiating crews. These folks can't even stop offensive linemen from committing false starts, and now we want to give them something else, something new to adjudicate as well while they are on the field? I'm sure nothing is going to go wrong with that. The NFL would have best been served by gradually rolling out a hip drop tackle ban over a period of 2 seasons or so. You know, announce what's going to happen, announce what it's looking for, work with the rules, work with the players, make sure everyone had a clear idea of what it was looking for, how it was going to be called, what the punishments were going to be, just so there wasn't any uncertainty about the entire process. Start in year 1 with education, maybe with fines, and just building up that knowledge, but also giving players a chance to have a training camp, two training camps actually, to learn what they're doing, what they could do to avoid it, what positions they shouldn't be in, get coaches involved to make sure they can coach it out of players instead of just heavy-handedly saying, we're not doing this anymore and you're on your own to figure it out. We all know in life, quitting something gradually is far more successful than quitting something cold turkey, but apparently Roger Goodell, the competition committee, all of those people do not understand that basic principle. Look, people, buckle up because things are going to get messy as it relates to the hip drop tackle in the NFL. It's only a matter of time, perhaps as soon as week 1, as a game is won or lost because this is being called incorrectly, and who knows how it's going to go down, but we all know that's how it's going to go down because this is the National Football League after all. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to know more about why the fumbling out of the end zone rule is actually a really good rule, well, you want to check out the video in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And to learn more about what the NRL does better than the NFL, well, the video in the lower right-hand corner of your screen is the place to go. Till next time, I'm Cheyenne Hollis. This is The Touchback, and as we say around these parts, hashtag take it out to the 25.